Your Honor, counsels, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I just want to please start by expressing, without really having the words for it, the gratitude that I think we all feel for your service on this case. I mean, so many weeks, way beyond what you were expected to do. So just as simply as I can, please let me just be part of expressing my just profound gratitude for your time and your service and your consideration in this case. I want to start with just a couple of housekeeping things about the charges, and then I'm going to get into the crux of the argument. A couple of the charges are stalking offenses, probably not something you think about all the time. Stalking involves two or more things happening, so a course of conduct where two or more things are done by the defendant. We're talking in our stalking allegations today about the April 24th peek-in using his daughter as one of the peek-ins over at Sadie's place, the planting of a phone to track her on May 8th, again peeking in or listening in on May 13th at Rosalio Guiterrez's place, and then of course the homicide committed on May 17th. So we're asking the court, you guys, to consider all of those things as acts of stalking, as well as the emails sent and the texts sent, the communications, the recordings of Sadie Beecham as well. So what needs to happen for a stalking is you need to have an impact that a reasonable person would have, and it's called, the part that we care about is suffering serious emotional distress, which means that you have to feel harassed or tormented, that a reasonable person has to feel that. The stalking statute also requires that the individual involved, the person who is suffering at the other end of that, also has to suffer serious emotional distress. In other words, personally feel that they have been harassed or tormented. And you heard in the texts and some of the discussions, both Rosalio and Sadie wrestle with the consequences of this, right? Talking about it. Sadie has a text where she says, I hope this, doesn't mean that you will, want to end this relationship because of this harassment. At points, Rosalio is trying to be comforting to her. At points, he is feeling aggressive, right? I'd like to go break this guy's legs. What's his address? The kind of human emotions that people have in response to feeling like their personal liberty, their space, everything that they sort of care about in their privacy is being compromised by this other person. And so those are the emotions that both you heard expressed in the text messages from both Rosalio and Sadie, and the question of what a reasonable person would think about that. Another just small housekeeping along those lines is hiding a corpse. We're suggesting to you that when Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered on the 17th at around 10 p.m., the placement of his body in the defendant's minivan is the beginning of a long stage of hiding a corpse. And so that is where that hiding a corpse begins in terms of our allegations to present to you today. So I want to first cover this idea that there are two separate but combined sets of facts that allow you to know that there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Rosalio Guiterrez was murdered on May 17th, 2020 at around 10 p.m., just around 10 p.m. at his own apartment. And I say that because there are two things that happen. One, there is a bloody, bloody scene. A scene that has pools of blood that I'm going to talk about a little more in a second. But also, there are the circumstances of Rosalio Guiterrez's absence from the life of everyone he cared about and who cares about him. Rosalio's phone shows he gets home at about 9:08 p.m. He's just dropped his kids off back at their mom's. He's expecting Neridia Macias. Her last text to him is at 9:37 p.m., and that text is never answered. She stays at the apartment building. Remember, she's at the wrong building. She doesn't see what is happening. But she stays for about a little more than a half hour, and she is texting and calling, essentially expressing to him, I'm here, what's going on? And none of those are answered. None of those are viewed. So at this point, from 9:37 on, Rosalio Guiterrez is no longer answering anyone who is concerned about him or interested in him or who care about him and his life. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are 1,039 days later. And what I just described to you is still the circumstance today. Rosalio loved his kids. He loved his mom, who he was in communication with as a guy almost 40 or around 40 every day. Every day he was in communication with his mom. And that suddenly ended at just around 10 p.m. on May 17th. He planned and proudly was ready to coach his promising son in baseball. And he never got a chance to do that. He had a summer camp scheduled for him and his children called, and it's a summer camp that's common for folks in Kenosha. And that summer camp was already planned. It's in his calendar, and that never occurred on the 19th of May. He no longer attended any of the holidays or events or visits. He no longer had any experiences with his children. He was a father whose daughter had a little love note to Dad on the pillow when she left. He was a father whose son shared his love of baseball and emulated him in every way he could in that love. And all of that has been gone for every day since May 17th, 2020. So combined with that bloody scene, you as a jury know he was murdered. You know that because those two things together show you that he is gone. So you know that there is a quantity of blood and a magnitude of blood in this case, which certainly tells that story. There is blood pooled on the floor by the couch. There's blood pooled on the couch itself. There's blood sprayed on wall after wall and on the ceiling in multiple areas and on almost every surface of his main room and the hallway by his door. There is a quantity and magnitude of blood which is absolutely consistent with Rosalio Guiterrez being murdered there at his own apartment. And every bit of that blood that's been tested in those different areas all come back to the DNA of Mr. Guiterrez himself. So that quantity of blood and his absence from any contact, any social media, any financial records, any of the people who care about him, any phones, any in-person contact, all of that is gone over those 1,039 days. And so we know and can say as a legal conclusion that a reasonable jury will find that he is murdered. The blood and his absence both tell us that story. So what else do we know about this crime based on the evidence that's been presented in this case? And I want to suggest to you first that the next obvious and real conclusion is that this is a highly planned, thought out, and executed crime of murder. And so I want you to think about who there is in this case who has shown a propensity, right? Who has shown day after day in the conduct that we have outlined patterns of that sort of planning, that sort of obsessive conduct, that sort of refusal to follow any of the limits and rules that most of us would govern ourselves and who we are willing to use to accomplish our goals in our lives. So when I say who, I mean, of course, the defendant, right? Because here's what we know about him in terms of other things happening in the very few weeks that we have a glimpse of his overwhelming, out of control, no limits jealousy towards any new love life for his ex, Sadie Beecham. What are those pieces of evidence I'm suggesting are signs of an obsessed planner that are the signature of this crime of murder? Well, one is, this is uncontroverted evidence, right? This is unchallenged evidence in this case in the record. The daughter tells you that her father had conceived a plan with her. And it is a truly sinister plan of having there be a day when Sadie had brought the boys and the daughter over to visit their dad. And then when they figured out that Sadie was gone to visit her new love life, then those children would be returned. And when those children would be returned, the daughter would make a call to her father saying, fraudulently, falsely, well, I don't know where mom is. We are abandoned. And then he would falsely save the day. He would report this. She would be a child neglect mom because of the false information and the horrible use of an 11-year-old girl to accomplish his sinister aims. Who comes up with a plan like that? Who offers that as something that an 11-year-old should do for them? What sort of mind is capable of putting that plan and that use of an 11-year-old out into the atmosphere as something real? And I'd suggest to you it's the same person who could commit and did commit this homicide. So what other evidence do I have that, this is a obsessive planner, knows no limits? Well, what about the daughter telling you that when she was urged to peek in that window at her mother, when her mother, a consenting adult, did not have the children over, I'm talking about April 24th, when Rosalio is over at Sadie's home, it's the evening, neither of them have their kids with them, they're consenting adults, and they're in the living room. And when the daughter peeks up over that into the window to look in at her mother, which the father has urged her to do, the defendant tells her, think about this as a small snapshot in this case. He tells her, hey, keep your shirt up so that you don't steam up the glass so that you can't be detected from inside. Who would even have ever thought of that? What sort of an obsessive planner has that in their brain to share to an 11-year-old? Who is there who is already thinking about cover-ups and avoiding detection in that kind of profound way? It's a snapshot, right? It's just a little moment. And, of course, it is the kind of thing I'd suggest to you an 11, 12-year-old would never have the capability of giving that kind of detail in a lie or frame up or some kind of false story that she was put up to. Think about all the computer files that this defendant has that are about Rosalio Guiterrez and the high amount of planning that is. All those snapshots that he stored on his computer, all the lookups he had done of this individual, and didn't just peek at them, stored them. Had a file for them. Had a file where he included the picture of the tracker. What about buying trackers at a point where you feel like you're losing control of Sadie Beecham and even though you have another girlfriend that you are wanting her to have no one in her life? The buying of the tracker itself is a sign of a planner who's willing to put a lot of obsessive effort into this. And then what about May 13th? You get your directions on your phone. Your phone puts you on May 13th right where Rosalio Guiterrez lives. And then you text Sadie the same sentence that has just come out of Rosalio's mouth. So you're overhearing from right on that patio what's being said inside, okay? Doesn't that yell out to you as a jury that that's a dry run, that that's a reconnaissance mission to figure out what the terrain is, so that the next time you come down, just 4 days later, you don't have to have your phone, right? You already know now how to get there. You've got the directions from your prior visit. You know how close your van will have to be when you kill this man to be able to remove his body from that location. You already have had a chance to think about and put together a plan that is informed. This is the planner. that is necessary to carry out the plan of what you have heard about the evidence that happened on May 17th. And you know that this is a highly planned incident. You know that because the defendant leaves his phone behind in Mech 1. But he's also off the grid. He's not answering or texting or web searching. There's none of the usual activity happening on his phone. But he leaves it. And what that tells you folks, knowing this obsessive planner in terms of the other glimpses we get at him, is that this is done for a purpose. Because he must be able to cloak where he goes, to hide where he goes, because of what he will do next. And so if that is the plan, of course he brings gloves, okay? Of course he brings the weapons he needs to be able to accomplish this murder. Of course he brings the tools that he will need to dispose of this body, right? The bags, any other tools he needs to finish that. Of course, this obsessive planner, this person, will have already thought about what the location is that he will place this body. What the dumpster is, or what the location is, will be something that has no connection to him, that does not require him to in any way deviate from any kind of timetable or plan. All of those things will have been thought over. Is it an accident that he picks a day of a heavy rainstorm when people aren't going to be out and about, or certainly aren't going to remain out and about? I would suggest it is not an accident. So what happens? Well, the first thing we know is that in that hallway of Rosalio's apartment, the blood tells a story. And I'm going to suggest to you a reasonable thought process for you is it tells a story of a blitz attack in that hallway. Someone hiding, ringing a doorbell, probably having no idea that Rosalio is expecting company, right? And so is a person who's going to be prone to open the door. But it is going to be somebody who Rosalio doesn't know. Because you're not going to blitz that person in the hallway and cause all that blood. If you know him, you're going to be inside. You're going to figure out a way inside to get yourself into a more private location. So it's going to be someone who will not be welcome and who you don't know. Rosalio doesn't know. And so you know from the evidence in this case that there are at least 2 blows, blunt force trauma blows. A hard object hitting Rosalio Guiterrez in a way that makes him bleed. And not only makes him bleed, but makes his blood fly into the air to hit doors. And you know that when that blood flies, that door in the hallway is open. So Rosalio has not yet managed to go back in or to close that door when he is first attacked. And so that is the blitz attack that evidence leads you to. Remember that Officer Van Wee told you that he knows that door was still open at some of the points that the blunt force trauma blows are happening because there's blood on the interior of the entry part of the door, and that when that door is closed, either in the hallway or inside, that part of the door would not be exposed. So you know there's a blitz attack, and you know there's a couple of blows that happen out there, and then you know whoever is the attacker, the defendant in this case, the planner, needs to get himself in that apartment. And why is that? Well, he needs to get himself in there because 2 neighbors, at least, may start to hear a ruckus, right? A neighbor, when she is talked to in some detail, when it's not just a cursory sort of canvas, but when she's talked to in some detail, says after 9 or around 9, I hear a scream in the hallway of pain and surprise at a time period right around May 17th. Marissa Swanigan, who testified, told you between 10 and 11 on May 17th, I heard a loud banging for about 5 minutes against my living room wall. Something big was forced up against the wall. Now the defendant knows that he's got to hurry. Okay? The blunt force trauma attack to get Rosalio Guiterrez in a position where he can be killed, that blunt force attack has to be finished as quickly and efficiently as possible because the defendant has no idea whether someone will come any moment soon. All of his preparation needs to be hurried. And so there are continuing blows. There's another blow now on the inside at the door that is a blunt force trauma. Again, blood flies onto the wall, onto part of the ceiling. Over by the dining room table, so a few steps further into the apartment, over on the wall over there, there's a table over there, and that also has a blow that is suffered right by it. And then there are additional blows at that table right at the entryway, and then another blow at the couch. These are all blunt force trauma blows, and Officer Van Wee said conservatively there have to be at the minimum 6 of those based on their locations and the differing blood that has splashed and spattered onto the blinds and all those surfaces and the ceiling and the wall. 6 blows of attack. But blunt force trauma is not an efficient way to end someone's life, right? You can immobilize someone. Maybe they'll die eventually. It is not an efficient way to quickly end someone's life. And so I'd suggest to you that the rest of the evidence in this case is certainly consistent with someone then changing weapons. And one of the things we know is that at least the handle of the object that was the blunt force trauma instrument, right? Whether it's a bat or an axe with a wooden handle, whatever, some kind of hammer with a wooden handle, whatever that first blunt force trauma object is. We know that there's such magnitude of blows, such force, whatever, that wood shatters. You know that the blows being administered to Rosalio Guiterrez eventually shatter that wood, because there's a shard of that wood that you see that has hair of Rosalio Guiterrez on it and the blood of Rosalio Guiterrez on it. Literally something that certainly seems like impacted his head, right? And there are other shards of wood found at other locations, right? On the couch, there's a couple of shards of wood. So we know that particular weapon got busted. And so some new weapon likely was employed. And I'd suggest to you a knife or a sharp object makes perfect sense. There's arterial spray, which is something that happens if you puncture an artery, which a sharp object will efficiently do for you and cause a spray, not the same blunt force trauma splashes and spatters and stains, but a different one. And often if you stab someone in their vital organs, because it's close to them, and if they're down and not fighting anymore, all you will have is blood flow and the drips and draining of their life out of their body. And so there would be no other and distinct evidence of this murder when you turn to the knife. And when you finish Rosalio Guiterrez, because he no longer in any way, shape, or form is able to fend off any blows. You have to hurry. People have already heard a little bit of a ruckus. You have to hurry. You have to finish him. And so you finish him and maybe get a little arterial spray, some blood drips. Your plan, the defendant's plan, was to make it look like he disappeared. And so he was going to stage this in a way that made it look like maybe this is a disappearance. And eventually people would figure that out, but that would buy some time, right? It's a Sunday night. This guy might be working in the morning. People might be coming over to his house first thing in the morning. How am I buying time would be your first plan. And so you are trying to create a plan. The defendant, the planner, is saying, I am going to try to stage this. But there's just so much blood, folks. And he's got to hurry. So he grabs up the wood pieces he can grab, but he misses one or two, right? He straightens up a couple of pieces of furniture that either fell over or got, repositioned as Rosalio Guiterrez is staggering, or maybe even, trying somehow to fend some blows off. Those moments of quick staging occur. You had an idea already, and so you follow through on taking his credit cards and his phone. You don't want to leave with those. You are afraid that those leaving might give some clue to where you've gone next, right? But if you hide them in the freezer, the battery will die quick, and there's a high likelihood that at least for a period of time, if somebody doesn't have their phone present, if somebody doesn't have their credit cards present, maybe they just left, right? So your half attempt to stage a disappearance, the defendant still chose to follow through on. Of course, the problem is there's just so much blood. And this staged disappearance will not allow you to leave that area rug, which is so saturated with blood, that some of that blood, before it was moved, has already spilled off into a larger pool that remains on the side of where that rug was. But what do? You take his glasses, because if a guy disappears, of course he takes his glasses. You take his boots, right, a pair of his shoes. You take some footwear, because of course if somebody disappears, they took that. So you take some basics to make sure you've staged it, but you got to take the rug. And you've brought supplies to be ready for this, right? You have made sure that you're going to minimize any kind of problems you'll have in your van and all that, but you didn't bargain for that much blood on the rug. And so you've figured out how you're going to transport him over. I don't know if you're using a tool or if you're just lifting him yourself. Whatever way you are moving that body that you've planned for, the body of Rosalio Guiterrez, wrapped in a rug, utilizing the duct tape and the rope that you brought, that your own daughter said was down in your basement when she left on this very same weekend. Using those supplies, you are leaving. But when you take this unwieldy, dead man, when you take him and you place him in the very back of your van, Rosalio Guiterrez and his DNA splash up. When you take him and you set him down, there's the tiniest of splashes. It's on the passenger side, halfway up that console. There's the tiniest speck of a splash that falls off as you set Rosalio Guiterrez's body down. It's almost imperceptible, but it's there, and it's in exactly the same location as the cutout carpet as that body was stored. And in the end, it reveals much of what a jury needs to know. So, while Rosalio Guiterrez is still wet with blood, while that carpet is still wet with blood, before it dries, when it would still be wet enough to splash because it's been seconds or a very few minutes since Rosalio Guiterrez shed that blood, that's when that speck of blood tumbles to that location in your van. And because you planned it, you do exactly what we would expect you to do, right? You wore footwear, maybe the steel-toed boots that you borrowed from your grandpa working at the tree farm just a day before. Maybe you wore those. You took them off. You put on some other footwear. You, of course, have now taken off your gloves. You've taken off that outer garment, that same plaid, sort of very light sort of outer garment that both your daughter and Sadie say was the last thing they saw you wearing in the late afternoon on the very same day that Rosalio goes missing. So just that they saw you wearing about 4 hours before, 4.5 hours before Rosalio's death. You take those items off, and of course you package them up. This is your plan. You're not going to operate your vehicles with those things still on you. You've planned this, just like you left your phone at home. And so an investigation that is hoping that you were not a planner, an investigation that was expecting that you were not prepared for those type of basic things, is never going to detect you in that situation. Right? Only things that are going to detect you are the things you could not have planned for, things you could not have intended. Now, you get home right away, okay? And I'm going to talk about the timing in a few minutes here and how absolutely impossible it would be for the timing to fit together this well and you be an innocent man. But you're home by 11:19 p.m. You've been radio silent. You've been off the grid for more than, for about almost 4 hours. Now you're on the phone. You're constantly on the phone from 11:19 to about 1 a.m. And so you are establishing your credibility and your bona fide that I've been here. Okay? Just like your plan was. You got back home almost immediately so that you could be sure that if anybody ever looked at you, that you were accounted for in a way that was helpful to you. But then after 1 o'clock, you're again off the grid for about 3 hours. Okay, now it's the middle of the night, so a lot of people are doing nothing during that period of time, right? But from 1 to 4, you're off the grid, and that gives you plenty of time to dispose of Rosalio Guiterrez's body in the planned location and to do some of the cleanup. Now, maybe you're in a dark location. Maybe you can't do all the cleanup you wanted. Maybe you find that when you start to do the cleanup, that some of the blood has actually saturated through whatever you thought was going to contain it, and it's actually seeped into part of the carpeting and matting in the back of your van. Okay? So maybe you are finding that Plan A is not going to be exactly workable. And so maybe you didn't have the tools for that bit of your preparation now not working perfectly. And so by 4 a.m., you are again trying to figure out where you can get cleaning materials early. And so you end up at Walmart and you buy more rubber gloves and more garbage bags and cleaning supplies, and you go to a location for 3 hours where it's people with family connections to you. It's a location you know no one else is going to be at, and you can finish your cleanup, again bagging all the items, again being meticulous about making sure that you don't leave any evidence, and of course at your own house over the next couple of days, you must run that fire pit and start to destroy some of the rest of the evidence. Because even when you do the cleanup, right, even when you do the cleanup, you are concerned that maybe the personal clothing that you are wearing will somehow be able to be tied to you, right? If somebody finds some of this stuff in a dumpster or buried somewhere or somewhere controlled, you can't leave your clothes, which is certainly going to have your DNA on it, right? Your pants, your socks, the boots you were wearing. You've got to get rid of those in a way that is DNA proof. And you know how you do that? You do that with fire. You burn those things so that no DNA will ever exist. Okay, so that's why the burning pit is going on in the rainstorm for a couple of days, because you're burning steel-toed boots. And we find at the very top of that burn pile steel toes and shoelaces, right? You burn your underwear, and we find a fragment of your underwear. You burn your jeans, and we find some buttons. And in fact, you might even burn 2 pairs of jeans, right? Because you might have changed jeans once from the time you committed the offense and then when you did the cleaning of the van in that second situation. So you might even you might even need to burn multiple pairs of jeans. And you burn socks, right? The ones you wore when you wore those boots. And so at the very top of your fire pit, there's bleach, and there's those kind of clothes consistent with that set of garments that you could have. okay? Those things are found in the fire pit. I want to talk about some of the major witnesses in this case for just a second, because I think that I want to have you hear me talk about sort of how I think they responded on the stand and where they sit in terms of your ability to adopt what they have said. So I want to speak first about Sadie Beecham, okay, who was, I think in every way you heard her, right, on the stand, confronted on cross-examination, in her texts, on the phone when you heard recordings of her. She is part scared, part at wit's end. She is frustrated. There are times she is trying to appease and make nice with the defendant. There are times she's trying to just manage a conversation, just trying to say anything she can to end the endless string of texts or end the hours-long phone calls. And in the meantime, there are family issues, right? There are a couple things happening in their lives which do not allow her to cut off all contact with the defendant. Do not allow her to have some rule that says, you know, when I tell you you're not welcome in my house, that means you can never, ever be over here because I need help sometimes with my daughter. And so she is a woman just trying to have something of her own. She's trying to have some relationship in her life that is not about the defendant. And he deals with that with such obsession, with such hostility, with such fury, that she tries every strategy that anyone has ever come up with to try to deal with that. And that's exactly how you folks on the jury would expect someone who is being stalked and who is being dealt with in that way day after day to behave. Sometimes she wants to curse at him. Sometimes she wants to try to say nice things to see if that'll work. Sometimes she wants him out of her house. Sometimes she needs him to help on something. This is real, but it doesn't mean that it's not overwhelming, oppressive, and something that she is truly scared of. I want to talk about the daughter in this case, who now is 14 years old, right? So you heard a 14-year-old who was, I think I'm going to call her sassy, who was courageous, who was absolutely adamant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, absolutely adamant about the things she told you, about things like that the back of that van was not cut out when I last saw the back of that van on the weekend of the 16th and 17th of May. Like that my father made me his spy, that he stole things from the car. All of those things she said. She was adamant about those things. When challenged by the defense, she gave extra details that she remembered, and she, in tone and in bravery, made it absolutely clear to you as a jury that she is her own person and that she knows what she is talking about. Now, is she perfect? Did she say exactly the same thing in exactly the same order as she did back in 2020? That would be impossible to do. As a 12-year-old and now 14, of course, some time has passed, right? But as to everything that truly matters, you will see a couple of things that were inconsistent, and they will not be things that for you truly matter. Was she coached? Was any of what she did something where an adult has ordered her or dominated her to provide that information? I would suggest to you she's the exact opposite of the personality of some 14-year-old who can be coached in terms of what she will say. Exact opposite. I want to talk about Marquand Washington, the inmate who came and told you what the defendant told him when they had a cell together for about a little more than 5 weeks. And I want to contrast him with Mr. McAtee, the inmate that the defense called to talk about Marquand Washington. And I think it's constructive to talk about them together for a second, to talk about what matters in terms of your thinking about and assessing that information. So Marquand Washington knew the defendant's home was in Mequon. He knew it was a home in poor condition in a rich area. That appears to be the case. He knew details about the defendant's family that have been unchallenged in this case. He knew about circumstances of the case which are sort of unimportant circumstances, but they're details that might lead you to understand that he has insider information. So what do I mean? Well, he says in the raid that the police found a lot of cash. The police found $47,000 plus, but only a little bit of weed. Okay? And sure enough, that is a summary that would be accurate in some, from some perspectives about what happened in a collateral part of the case. So these are the kind of details. He knew what his job was. He knew he had worked for, in construction and in cable, laying cable. So these are things that Marquand Washington knew about the background of the defendant. So he knew some personal facts. And then he talked about what, of course, he told him about the offense, and he told him this was a private conversation. No word was ever said to me where another person was ever present. He only told me a few of the facts. He did not outline everything that happened in the case. That he also told the defendant all sorts of details about his case. You heard Marquand Washington say he's never cooperated before. So this is the first time he's ever done this. And again, that is unchallenged in this case, that he has not been a person who from a jail has ever informed on an individual before. There's absolutely no evidence of any other cooperation along those lines, where in the context of hearing something in a jail, he decided to do something with it. He also told you that if he lies, if he's caught in a lie in this case, that the agreement that he currently has will be eliminated, will be destroyed. So really, he is at huge risk if Marquand Washington decides to say anything that is false in this case. He's at huge risk to have everything that he's hoping for in a federal agreement be destroyed. So here's the contrast with Mr. McAtee. And I think it's so helpful that you got a chance to see Mr. McAtee, because now you get a chance to evaluate what a jailhouse sort of operator looks like in contrast to what Mr. Washington gave you and showed you. Okay? So they're similar. They both have a federal case, right? So they have surface similarity. Mr. McAtee has 11 priors. But Mr. McAtee has two recent in time situations where he has fraudulently caused pretend legal mail, so pretend documents, to be sent into the jail where he was fraudulently involved in this under attorneys' names. So there would be these innocent human beings on the planet who would be supposedly the person who sent these documents into the jail, and they would have drugs in them. So theoretically, two other human beings, in this case lawyers, right, would be individuals who would be, of course, under high suspicion, right, of having caused drugs to come into the jail. And what the defendant, what Mr. McAtee admitted to you is, yes, I was involved in those plans. In the second one, after he's caught the first time, he actually goes to the legal computer in the jail and completely forges a legal envelope and the legal mail. In both cases, he uses cellmates, okay, people he's been incarcerated with, as part of his fraud. So you know about Mr. McAtee that in the jail setting, he is a documented forger and person who's trying to fraudulently do things, that he's willing to risk totally innocent parties in that fraud, and that he forms alliances with fellow inmates to do things that are not proper in these circumstances. Does not sound like somebody who could be relied upon. What else do we know about Mr. McAtee? Well, he was asked, he claimed that he had a deal that he'd been offered by the state. When surprise was expressed about that, as I recall it, the judge asked his attorney, who was in the gallery, and his attorney said, no, there's no deal. So Mr. McAtee was contradicted by his own lawyer about the circumstances of his coming to testify in front of you while he was here. I don't know how more clear it can be that Mr. McAtee cannot be relied on by you for any information. And then finally, Mr. McAtee, and I tried to be very careful when I did this under cross-examination. I asked Mr. McAtee, so tell me where this man was who was yelling to you or telling you in above a conversational voice, essentially giving you a tutorial on how to be a snitch in the jail. And he said, I was in the upper tier, as was this other gentleman, okay, this person he's talking to. We can't see each other because there's mesh there. The cell fronts are obscured, but we're talking and he's across from me, upstairs. Well, when we looked into it, Marquand Washington was never upstairs. So, again, the most basic reported fact by Mr. McAtee is false. Whoever he had a conversation with across from him is not Marquand Washington. If that conversation ever took place, he's got the wrong guy based on where he told you this person was located. Because Marquand Washington moved in a couple of different places, but he was always, there was never a time he was in that upper tier. Okay? McAtee is just plain wrong about the basic detail that he tried to give you. In fact, you saw the pictures. They're on the complete opposite ends for all but 6 hours of the time they're together. And even then, they're not on the same tier. So literally, you'd have to have a situation where guys who are all the way across from each other, where Marquand Washington is willing in the security part of the jail. Remember, these are people who've already misbehaved in the jail. Is that the environment where you think it's at all reasonable to believe that Marquand Washington, a guy as careful as he sounded in this courtroom, is going to scream out instructions on how to get yourself out of a case, how to be a snitch, with other inmates obviously able to hear that same thing? When McAtee himself told you federal inmates who snitch are in danger. So why would Marquand Washington advertise that? And remember, Marquand Washington had never cooperated at the time this was talked about. So you'd have to believe he was literally giving advice, even though they got the location wrong. He was literally giving advice on something he had never done that would put him in mortal danger. And your authority on that is a guy who's fraudulently sent legal mail to get drugs 2 times using other inmates. Okay, so I also want to talk about the 3 crime lab analysts for just a second, right? So you have Lisa Treffinger, Ron Watucky, and Julie Avila. You have more than 70 years experience at the State Crime Lab. All 3 of them tell you, and this is undisputed, there's no competing evidence in this case, all 3 of them tell you that stain in that van, okay, it's A1 in their lab stuff, right? A1, that stain in the van of the defendants, is blood. Every one of them offered you the opinion it's blood. 70 years of experience, okay? People who go to crime scenes as their job every day over many of the years of their careers, okay? 3 different experts tell you it's blood. 2 of them also tell you, so now you also know, again, undisputed, it's the DNA of Rosalio Guiterrez. So it's blood, and it's undisputed evidence in this case that that is the DNA of Rosalio Guiterrez. Lisa Treffinger, an expert on this field, tells you that she did the testing. Ronald Watucky, who reviewed those findings, told you about his conclusions about this case. And then 2 of these 3 experts are asked, and so now this is Ron Watucky and Julie Avila. What else can you tell us about this speck, this red brownish speck in the van? And those 2 individuals, Ronald Watucky, who's been working at the state crime lab since before they started doing DNA, and Julie Avila, who has 22 years there, said, we've seen lots of blood. Not only does it look like blood, but it looks like it is splashed on there. In other words, it is not transferred blood. Again, this is their expert opinion. It hasn't been smudged on there or wiped on there. It's not, in other words, something someone planted there. It's splashed on. When that blood was still wet, it's splashed on. 3 crime lab analysts give you such important evidence in this case. Okay, so we've talked about how this evidence is organized. We've talked about what the evidence is. The burden of proof is on the state in each and every aspect of this case. Okay, so in no way let any argument I have said in any way, shape, or form indicate to you that there's any other burden of proof but the state of Wisconsin, each and every element. You're allowed to consider the evidence and organize the evidence in any way you want, right? You can think about it and organize it as a group and in your own minds in any way you want. And I'm going to ask you to think about the evidence in this way as one of the ways you do consider it. Could all of the things I'm now going to go through, could all of them be true for an innocent man who is falsely accused? Could an innocent person falsely accused have all of the things I'm about to outline to you happen to them? Is that in any way reasonable, is my question to you, okay? So, Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered on May 17th, 2020. His body's found on May 19th, 2020, okay? If the defendant is an innocent man and falsely accused, this should have 0 effect on him, right? He lives in Mequon. That is an hour's drive away. There's absolutely no way the death of a person in Kenosha should impact him in any way, innocent and falsely accused, okay? Now, here's where it starts to get more and more unlucky for him, more and more unreasonable for him to not be the person who committed this offense, right? Because it turns out that this person who should be a random person in the life of the defendant is actually the first man that Sadie has dated since she ended her long-time relationship with you, okay? So now we have, it's not just a random city, it is the guy who Sadie has been Sadie's first kind of real, some kind of relationship since she broke it off with you. Okay, again, if you're an innocent guy, you're falsely accused, you have your own girlfriend, you're not, you've said you're not jealous in any way, this really shouldn't impact you, right? This is a guy she's dating, but so what? It should have 0 reason to cause you any concern or be a problem, a situation that's a problem for you. However, here's a problem for you. Here's where it starts to be so unfortunate if you're an innocent man and falsely accused, right? Because even though you have a girlfriend, even though you are not a jealous guy about this new relationship Sadie has, when the police start to do digging, they find all sorts of documentary evidence that you are extremely jealous. There are, for instance, on your own devices, recordings of you talking about how jealous you are, that the state played for you in this case. There are legions of emails that we showed you and texts that show how jealous you are of her relationship. And so, unfortunately for you, there is a body of evidence that documents that even though you have a girlfriend, you are very extensively jealous in obsessive ways about what happens in Sadie Beecham's love life. And so here's how unlucky you are. Those kind of obsessive acts of jealousy that you have also begin to show that you don't know any limits. Here's how unlucky you are if you're falsely accused here, right? Because on March 4th, you go into Sadie Beecham's home where her babysitter finds you looming over her, wakes her up before 4 a.m. in the morning. You are screaming about how Sadie Beecham is a whore, and you are accusing the babysitter of being a whore as well in your fury. And it's all about jealousy because Sadie Beecham, who is broken up with you, had the audacity to go on a vacation and not let you know, and she surely is cheating on you. It's got to be that she is cheating on you. And you go wake up your 12-year-old daughter, and by the way, it's a school day that next day, and your 4-year-olds. You go and wake them all up, and you, knowing no limits, make them a breakfast, a 4 a.m. breakfast on a school day. You don't know any limits. And by March 4th, we are already getting a flavor for how you behave when Sadie Beecham refuses to be under your thumb. So it's unlucky that you would have done that just a couple of months before, and somehow Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered on May 17th. But here's how much more unlucky you get. Because that date of May 17th turns out to have a bunch of significance if the person involved in the murder is really focused on Sadie Beecham's love life, right? Because May 17th, the date of the murder, is one day before Sadie Beecham meets Rosalio's kids for the first time. And if you're monitoring Sadie Beecham, if your antenna towards Sadie Beecham is obsessive and controlling, and anything she does hits your antenna like a rocket ship, right? Then when she meets his kids, you have a whole nother degree of concern and fury. And in fact, the day Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered, Sadie Beecham texts Rosalio and says to him in a text, "I would like to take our relationship further." These are the words that the defendant cannot allow. He cannot tolerate these words. He will not let this happen. Is it an accident or just horrible random fortune that Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered at the same time that her obsessive ex would be learning and beginning to find out that all the steps and signs look like she is moving on? Is that an accident? You are horribly unfortunate and as an innocent, falsely accused man if that's the case. And so here's how bad your fortune is if you're innocent and falsely accused. Sadie Beecham, who remains at the scene on the 19th when this bloody scene is discovered, reveals to law enforcement, hey, I think my ex has been monitoring me in a variety of ways out of jealousy. And this should be easily cleared up, okay? So this should be an opportunity for an innocent, falsely accused man, right? Because the defendant has already told Sadie in a variety of communications, and Sadie herself told you, he's already told me none of these things are true, right? On the 24th, I have a very good excuse for why I was at your house and peeped in, although some of it involves a premonition. On May 8th, I accidentally must have dropped a phone in your car. I never did that on purpose. I'm not monitoring you. And then on the 13th, it's just pure accident that I texted something to you that's the same thing that Rosalio said. I was never anywhere near you. Okay? So, assuming this is true and you're not an obsessive ex who's been doing all these very disturbing things, this should be able to be cleared up. It should be able to be cleared up. Here's how unlucky you are if you're an innocent, falsely accused guy. All of the electronics in this case back up Sadie Beecham. Okay? They back him up. She says, we were videotaped. That's what I've been told. Sure enough, there's video. She says, I believe he was tracking me on May 8th. I don't believe him that he dropped it accidentally. What does his computer show? That he was actually tracking her. Not only that, but the places that he tracked her, he took screenshots of those trackings, okay, of that phone, and he put them in the Rosalio Guiterrez file on his computer. So he's lying to her. Okay, he's lying to her about that. And then on May 13th, his phone, his own electronics, puts him in Kenosha at the exact time that that text is made to her that repeats the words Rosalio just said to her. So every time the electronics finds, rather than clearing him, that he's lying. And that those obsessive, boundary-breaking moments are all true. Okay, so here's another horrible piece of luck if you're an innocent guy and falsely accused. After you found out Sadie was seeing someone, you purchased 2 trackers, okay, to track vehicles with no explanation for that is in the record, right? That we don't know of any reason, but it certainly is coincidental timing. And you know, here's one thing that would be lucky for you again. Here's an opportunity you could clear yourself, right? If those 2 trackers could be found, surely they would show that they haven't been mounted on Rosalio's vehicle, they haven't been used to follow him or make sure that you know he's home at certain times or any of that. But one of those 2 trackers can't be found at any of the search warrants. We found 1 but not 2. We ordered 2. We know 2 were delivered based on the electronic information. 1 is missing. What horrible luck if that tracker would have again been able to clear you. Okay, here's horrible luck. Marquand Washington, who you roomed with for 5 weeks, only time he's ever cooperated, says all the things he says, including that you ended up stabbing this man in the end, that you used garbage bags, that he'll never be found, and that he suggested the way to kill someone is to surveil them and keep tabs on them and use the devices you can buy, like trackers on Amazon. Here's horrible luck. You yourself bought trackers on Amazon. You yourself have been documented in all the ways we just talked about on each of those days as being involved in surveillance of the victim. So all of the ways you said would be the right way to prep to do a murder, to do a mission of murder, are actually confirmed by your own devices. That's really bad luck. It's horrible luck if you've been falsely accused. Okay, so, you know, here's a moment where you'd think that, that you've been monitoring this guy. You do admit to the police that on April 24th you did peek in the window, but you took your 11-year-old to witness it. Your 11-year-old who was about to turn 12. You took your daughter to witness that. You used her as a tool, as your fellow spy in there. And so, again, you're unlucky because a jury hearing that will know that you don't have any of the limits that they would expect for a person who was innocent and falsely accused. Now, here's another one, right? You're accused by Sadie as part of these accusations of taking items from Rosalio's truck. His registration and a letter to a person named TJ. The daughter also confirms those things. But you didn't do this because you're not jealous and you are not controlling, and of course you do know limits, and you're just being falsely accused. So again, here's a moment where if you're an innocent, falsely accused guy, we're going to be able to clear things up, right? Here's a moment where we're going to be able to show, okay, we've now looked at what you're saying, that you didn't do these things, and we're able to verify. But in fact, just the opposite is true, isn't it? Because what we find in his electronics we find that not only right after you would have returned from Sadie's place on April 24th, so in the early morning hours of April 25th, you're already doing searches of Rosalio's Colorado plate and the name of Rosalio's stepdad, a name on your registration document, okay, which was in the truck. So you are searching for a name that you shouldn't have unless you have a document from his truck. And then, again on a device, we find a snippet of that same registration document, which has the stepdad's name on it, and in the defendant's own handwriting, he has the handwritten address of Rosalio Guiterrez. So again, we have a portion of the document you stole from that truck on your electronics. And so we know you're not telling the truth again. And again, we know you're not telling the truth, and you know no limits, and you have obsessive jealousy, and it's focused on Rosalio Guiterrez. Okay, so, again, you claim it was an accidental plant of the phone on May 8th. Again, this should be able to be cleared up, but I told you it's on his computer. So again, that shows you're lying, and again, horrible luck if you're an innocent guy falsely accused. Here's horrible luck. You're an innocent man, right? You're not jealous. None of this stuff is true. It's just a horrible set of coincidences and circumstances. But you have a file on your computer that is named Rosalio Guiterrez. You had to write that name on there. And in it is not only a picture of a tracker that you've included in that file, but all sorts of pictures of Rosalio Guiterrez and his kids. On the defendant's computer are pictures of Rosalio Guiterrez and his kids. We pass those through you guys as a jury. Horrible luck if you are not responsible for his death. Horrible luck that you were bothering to put things like pictures of his kids in your computer, that you had to take off of some internet source, right? Facebook or something. You had to screenshot each one of them. You made a choice each time that was important to you. It was important to store that. No limits on the defendant and his behavior. On May 13th, again, we should be able to clear you on May 13th. Sadie says, listen, he texted me the same thing that Rosalio just said when I was at his place. There's no reason that the defendant should be over at Rosalio's place when I am visiting him on May 13th. Well, your bad luck is that your phone puts you there. At the same time she says that text is being made, your text is the same words she claims are on there, and it sure looks to a jury like you are rehearsing, like this is a dry run for the murder you will commit 4 days later. So here's how your bad luck continues, right? Because there's a crescendo of activity that seems to be leading to a homicide, and it's bad luck that these are things all from you. May 14th, okay, 3 days before the homicide. Do you want me to stop by to meet Junior tonight? A little later, half hour later. So you're saying I can stop by and meet someone later? You're taunting Sadie. You're taunting her and thinking gloriously about what will happen when you meet him. Remember what your daughter told us? Remember what she said on the stand? Let me get to that. Let me make sure you guys hear that one more time. She says, my dad said something about showing him who the man was. That sounds like what you're up to on May 14th. May 16th, 1 day before the homicide, folks. one day before the homicide. You have the kids over when this text goes out. You're not a jealous guy, right? You're an innocent man falsely accused. And what you're bothering to text Sadie Beecham is, this is one day before the homicide. You race down to Kenosha every chance you get to lay down with some Down syndrome Mexican version of your father. That's how you choose to address her one day before the death of Rosalio Guiterrez. Awfully, horribly unlucky and inconvenient if you are an innocent man falsely accused. Here's where the bad luck gets profound. Here's where it becomes patently unreasonable for you to believe that the defendant is an innocent man falsely accused. Because on the evening of the murder, okay, around 10 p.m., the defendant's phone, at the exact time period necessary to commit this murder, is off the grid. In fact, all of his devices are off the grid from 7:30 to 11:19. What are the chances? What are the chances of the exact time period needed to drive to Kenosha, wait around, wait for Rosalio Guiterrez to get home at a little after 9, murder him at around 10, and then get yourself back to Mequon? How is it that that amount of time is the exact period of time you're off the grid? That would be the worst luck in human history if you were a person who was innocent and falsely accused. Here's the absurdity of any conclusion other than that the defendant is involved. Okay? Tell me how this portion of bad luck could even exist in the world. The defense put in some evidence about the phone changing position. You remember it went from up to the side? And the time period on that was 10:11 p.m. on May 17th. Okay? I'm going to suggest to you by far the most logical reason why that phone would change positions is it's been placed in the freezer. Right? That's why it's changed position. It's now being hidden in the freezer at 10:11 p.m. Okay? Well, we know from the defendant getting directions on May 13th. Remember you heard the recordings of those directions? That the directions that the defendant got on May 13th were just a minute or two over an hour. 10:11 p.m., the phone changes position and goes in the freezer. You got to take care of a few more things, right? You got to straighten up things, maybe pick up some wood. You've already moved the body. Now you're doing the last staging, right? Okay, I'm going to leave the wallet on the couch, but I'm going to put the credit cards on the phone. You're doing those last seconds of staging. So maybe you take a couple minutes to do that. You're home, back in Mequon, answering your phone at 11:19 p.m. An hour and 8 minutes from when that phone changed position. Can that be an accident? Is that just horrible luck? That one of the final acts, one of the things that makes sense to have be the final act of your staging, exactly times you to get you back to Mequon to use your phone as quickly as you can, so you're back, so you can start to get your alibi running and going. I would suggest to you the chances of that timing being true for an innocent, falsely accused man with all the rest of what I've said is astronomically impossible. It's impossible. What else? Well, remember, this is an evening. Here's how bad luck it is. Your girlfriend, Miss Remsburg, is expecting you. She is texting and calling you throughout the time you're off the grid, saying, hey, thought you were coming over. Here's what I was making. Here's the movie I was planning. Okay, I guess you're not coming. She gets madder and madder as these go on. Clearly does not know you're not arriving. In fact, she said that on the stand. So a night when she expected you, on the very night Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered, you're not in the place where you were expected. And you, even when you do get in contact with her, you have a long call with her around midnight, you still don't go over there. You don't go over to make it up. If she's mad, you don't do any of those things because you need that time to dispose of that body and get rid of evidence. So horribly unlucky that that would happen. Okay, here's something unlucky. It's the 19th now of May. You're arrested, right? You have taken out on May 15th $50,000 from Wells Fargo Bank in 20s. So it's in cash. You still have a little more than $47,000 at your place. And so you're unlucky because a jury could reasonably guess that that's your cash money for if this murder somehow goes wrong, right? You have an escape fund that is ready. You are ready before the 17th with a bunch of ready cash so that if you need to not use a credit card, not show ID, pay just like you paid at Walmart on the 18th, you have all the cash you need to be on the run for a good period of time. That's horribly unlucky if you're an innocent guy and falsely accused. Horrible unluck that you need to burn some clothes and it is heavy rains and you still are operating a fire pit. Do you remember that one of the witnesses in this case, who's a friend of the defendant, said, yeah, I went over there on the 18th, pouring rain, he is operating a fire pit even then. And so you have this fire going through the heavy rain. Here's how unlucky you are. The very top of the ashes, the top level of the ashes, have jeans button, Hanes sock, underwear, bleach bottle, and steel toes for boots with laces. That's at the top of the burn pile. This is what you have been burning most recently in terms of things they can see. And it all sounds like the type of things you might need to burn to cover up DNA. That's horribly unlucky. That you would be involved in a burn in heavy rainstorms for days, and that the top level are the very things that seem like you are trying to destroy DNA. Boy, you're unlucky that the back third of your carpet is cut out. You're horribly unlucky, and you're horribly unlucky that your 12-year-old daughter and now 14-year-old daughter reports that isn't how it looked when my brothers got out of the vehicle. I saw what my dad put in there. I saw what my dad had. And the carpet, in terms of bleach stains and the cutout, she was adamant with you folks on the jury that that back third was not cut out when she last saw that van on the weekend of May 16th and May 17th when she left. Her mom picked her up on May 17th in the afternoon. Remember, Miss Remsburg also said that van cutout. We showed her a picture. She said that van cutout did not exist when I last saw the van as well. So 2 witnesses told you that that third of the van had not been cut out. So what horrible, horrible luck for the defendant if he is an innocent, falsely accused man that for some reason he cut out that carpet. It's in the exact place that that speck of blood of Rosalio Guiterrez is. And here he is with that carpet cut out. Now, again, if he cut it out recently, we probably would be able, you'd think, well, he could clear himself, right? Because we'd find that carpet somewhere on his property. But that carpet cutout is gone. Again, it's missing. And it could clear him, right? Just like Grandpa's boots could clear him. Just like the shirt might clear him. All these things that could clear him are missing from this case. That's because they would never clear him. That's the real answer. But what a horrible circumstance for a guy who is falsely accused. So, you think about the ultimate bad luck in this case, and I already talked about the DNA evidence, so I won't belabor it. I just want to say, what are the chances that in this exact square foot on the planet Earth, the exact square foot on the planet Earth, a man who's innocent and falsely accused would have the blood of the man who died on May 17th? How could that happen? What is the astronomical, unbelievable bad luck to have that in his van right under where carpet has suddenly been cut away, right, in the same van back as the bleach stains? How could that be? And your daughter, how could you be so unlucky that your daughter is also willing to testify that you were focused on this guy, that you were stealing from him, that you were spying on him in all sorts of different ways, that she was being asked to spy on him, and that every time she saw you this is what you were obsessed with. Could you be an innocent and falsely accused man who has your daughter say all those things, including, I may just watch him or follow him to his house one time, just for the fun of it? So I want to end this sort of idea that you can't be an innocent man falsely accused with this piece. Unchallenged evidence in this case is that two individuals, Mike Campbell and a buddy, go to the defendant's home before law enforcement is ready to come in and arrest and do a search. Mike Campbell, this is unchallenged evidence in the record here, says, I told the defendant, I thought at the time he was his brother, that's what he had told me, but I told the defendant, hey, we're looking for our buddy in Kenosha. He was dating your ex and he is missing. So now the defendant knows, okay? If he's an innocent and falsely accused guy, he knows, okay, people are concerned about a guy in Kenosha who's missing, and he is an ex of, he is dating my ex. And of course, he already has a computer file on this guy, etc. So, there's no way the defendant doesn't put two and two together about who they might be speaking about. So now Kenosha law enforcement are now going to talk to the defendant, okay? He's been visited by people who told him, hey, our buddy from Kenosha is missing. He knows that it's Sadie's new boyfriend. Now police are speaking to him, okay? There's no way the defendant on the 19th of May does not understand what a big moment this is, okay? Here is his opportunity by telling the whole and total truth to clear himself, right? He will be able to clear this up. You just got to tell the truth. You just got to be honest about what the circumstances are so that we can clear this up. Because this is a big deal. This is no one playing around. Someone's missing. What does he choose to do at that moment? And you tell me if an innocent and falsely accused man would behave in this way. Okay? They ask him about what car he operates. You know what he says? The Audi. He goes with the Audi. They keep pressing him. Oh, yeah, okay, well, there's a van, but I hardly drive that. They press him some more. Everybody drives that. Well, from Remsburg that the defendant at this time period is using the minivan. You know from the Walmart video the defendant is using the minivan. So the defendant, for some reason, deliberately tries to avoid talking about the minivan. 2 days after the homicide, knowing Rosalio Guiterrez is missing, he doesn't want to talk about the minivan. He's trying to steer the detectives to the Audi. Why would you do that if you're an innocent man and falsely accused? They ask him about the different circumstances. They ask him about whether he placed a phone on May 8th. Rather than sharing that, I have monitored the phone on occasion. There might be something on my computer. I've put it in Rosalio Guiterrez's file. He denied that on May 8th that he had done any placement of a phone. The electronics show that that's not true. He chose to lie to law enforcement about that incident relating about what Sadie and he had talked about. He said, I never videotaped on that April 24th incident where I peeked into Sadie's window with my daughter. Never videotaped. Well, why would you say that when we have that video on your devices? When you, the jury, got to see at least snippets or a glimpse of that video, what we have of that video. Again, he chooses to lie about that rather than saying, yes, here's all the things I did, but I never did the piece that I don't have anything to do with this person in any other way. He said, I've never seen this Rosalio other than the one time I saw him through the window. Well, we have the directions to Rosalio on May 13th on the defendant's devices. We have the text. We have the phone that shows he's at that residence at that time. He's asked about, does he know who Sadie is dating? Okay, now this is an easy one. He's got a file in his computer that he has labeled Rosalio Guiterrez. He's looked up Rosalio Guiterrez's background in all sorts of ways, right? This ought to be a softball question. Here's what the defendant does. He says, yeah, you know, I think his name starts with a, last name starts with a G. He's called Junior. He might be a contractor. He acts like he doesn't even know this guy's name, which is completely false and is not what you do if you're an innocent man and falsely accused. And then he is asked, members of this jury, he's asked, where were you 2 nights ago? Not 2 weeks ago, not 2 months ago, 2 nights ago, okay? And he says, I believe I was with my girlfriend. They press him a little more, Christine Remsburg. I believe I was at her house. Now, he hedges later, but he goes with a false alibi. He goes with a false alibi. And you know what? When they go to talk to Christine Remsburg, she also begins. She's been with him the last 2 days since. You heard her say that. She also goes with a false alibi when the cops first talk to her. And she doesn't change her mind about that until after her sister, who also testified, said, you know what, that did not happen. I remember my sister had been stood up and she was mad. And then when they went back to Christine Remsburg, she said, okay, you're right. I was mistaken about that information. You as a jury are supposed to believe that they both gave a false alibi about something that happened 2 days earlier, and they both gave the identical false alibi by accident? You're supposed to believe that's just another horrible coincidence for an innocent man falsely accused? So I'd suggest to you, if you lie about what car you use, when the car that transported the body is the one you are avoiding, when you lie about whether you are doing any activities regarding Sadie and Rosalio, when your electronics tell us you are, when you lie about where you were 2 days ago, because during the time period we care about, Rosalio was being murdered, those are the type of lies you don't tell if you know how serious it is and you are an innocent man falsely accused. These things could not all happen. Those 40-plus things I just went through with you could not all happen to some unfortunate, innocent person who's falsely accused. The only reasonable conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, is that those things have occurred to one individual on this planet, the defendant, because he is guilty of the offenses before you. That's the only reasonable conclusion. No way all those things could happen, all in combination to an innocent man. You have 1,039 days of proof that Rosalio Guiterrez is murdered. His blood in that van is proof who murdered him. The electronics of the defendant himself demonstrate his obsession and his more and more concerning pattern, and that he knows no limits. And they tell you that he has a gap off the grid, which is exactly the amount of time that is necessary. And the defendant's lies to law enforcement confirm, because they are on such major matters, they confirm for you that this is not an innocent man falsely accused. And when you put all this evidence together, you will say to yourself, it was quite a plan, but it is not a plan that in the end can succeed, because it is betrayed by that speck of blood of Rosalio Guiterrez, it's betrayed by the electronics, and it's betrayed by the defendant's own lies. And you will find this defendant responsible, and you will hold him responsible despite this plan that he tried everything he could to avoid responsibility. Thank you.